My son, Mark, ripped up the journal that held 50 years of my life. He flung the pages across the floor, a snowstorm of memory and ink, and then he tore them to pieces, right in front of me. He shouted, his voice a jagged thing I didn't recognize. "You crazy old hag! Ain't nobody want to read your dusty paper? Get out of my face!" But he didn't know. He couldn't have known that in his rage, he wasn't destroying my past. He was creating his future. Those torn memories, that trash he spat on, would become the testimony that brings his whole life down. I'm Dorothy Mae Washington, but my friends from the Austin Writers Circle, God bless their souls, they just call me Dottie Mae. But first, before I get too far ahead of myself, wherever you're listening from, in your car or your kitchen, would you do an old woman a favor? Send a like or leave a comment below just to let me know you're here with me. In a world that can feel mighty quiet sometimes, knowing someone is listening, well, it means the world. Now, as I was saying, I'm 68 years old, a retired university librarian living out my days here in Austin, Texas. For the past 30 years, since John passed, my home has been this little weathered bungalow tucked beneath the sprawling, benevolent arms of a giant pecan tree. It's a quiet neighborhood, the kind where you can hear the ice cream truck from 6 blocks away, its tinny music a slow, meandering soundtrack to the summer afternoons. Most days, if you were to pass by, you'd find me right here on the porch swing, its gentle, rhythmic creak a familiar comfort to my old bones. I'd have a book in one hand, usually something southern and gothic, full of ghosts and long-held secrets, and a tall glass of sweet tea in the other, sweating onto a coaster my grandmother crocheted 70 years ago. Faintly, carried on the breeze, you might catch the sound of a country music drifting from a nearby honky-tonk, a mournful steel guitar telling a timeless story of love and loss. Sometimes, especially on a weekend, the rich, smoky scent of brisket wafts through the trees, a delicious promise carried from a family BBQ down by the riverside. That's home to me. It's not grand, not perfect. Lord knows the paint is peeling and the faucet in the kitchen drips, but it's full of memory. It's a place where the ghosts are friendly, where the past is a warm, breathing presence. Inside, the house is a testament to a life spent in the company of words. Bookshelves, built by the strong, capable hands of my late husband, John, stretch from floor to ceiling in nearly every room. They groan, quite literally, under the weight of American literature, poetry, history, and my secret vice, the occasional hard-boiled detective novel. The air in here has its own unique perfume, a blend of old paper, lemon polish from my weekly dusting, and faintly, so faintly you might think you're imagining it, the sweet smell of John's pipe tobacco, a scent that has stubbornly refused to fade from the velvet curtains. On the living room wall, right above the fireplace, hangs a grainy black and white photograph of him. He's holding his beat-up acoustic guitar, a beautiful old Martin that was his most prized possession. His eyes are half closed mid-note, his head tilted back, a country singer through and through. He's caught in that sacred moment of pure creation, lost to everything in the world but the sound he's making. John used to say this house had good bones, just like a well-written song. He was the one who filled it with music, with his booming laugh that could shake the windows, and with the constant gentle thrum of that guitar. He was never famous, never even came close to a record deal. But in our little living room, to me and our son, He was a legend. He'd sit in that worn-out floral armchair, the one I still can't bring myself to get rid of. Its fabric faded, and its springs complaining with a soft sigh whenever I sit down. He'd play for hours, writing and singing songs about heartache and long dirt roads, about the kind of steadfast love that sticks to your ribs and sees you through the lean years. Even now, in the deepest quiet of the afternoon, if I hold my breath, I can sometimes feel the vibration of the chords through the old wooden floorboards, a ghost of a melody lingering in the still, sunlit air. He had this way of looking at me when he'd finished writing a new song. His eyes, the color of rich Texas soil after a good rain, asking the only question that ever mattered. Did it move you, Dottie Mae? And it always, always did. Marky. I know he's a grown man of 40, a vice president of something or other, but in the quiet, private corners of my heart, he's still Marky. He's brilliant, sharp as a tack. He always had that spark of his father's creativity, but his mind was built for logic and numbers, for a world I never quite understood. He works in tech over in Houston, a city of glass towers and humming servers that feels a million miles away from my dusty bookshelves and creaking porch swing. Life, it has a way of pulling us apart, doesn't it? It stretches the threads that connect us until they're thin and translucent, almost invisible. Since he got married to that woman, his visits have grown scarce, then practically non-existent. A phone call on my birthday, usually rushed, with the sound of typing in the background. A generic greeting card at Christmas, signed in his wife's perfect, impersonal script. But mostly, there's just silence. A silence that has grown wider and deeper with each passing year. A vast, empty canyon between us that I don't know how to cross anymore. Still, a mother's love is a stubborn, irrational thing. I pray for him every morning. Before the sun is all the way up and the birds have started their chorus, I sit by the kitchen window with a warm mug of coffee in my hands, and I whisper his name to God like a litany, a habit as ingrained and unconscious as breathing. John died too soon. Cancer. It was a thief in the night, a cruel and efficient bandit that hollowed him out fast, leaving behind just a whisper of the vibrant man he was. I was 35 years old, and the word widow felt like a costume that didn't fit, a heavy, suffocating cloak I was forced to wear. The nights were the hardest part. After I tucked Marky in, his small 7-year-old body finally still in sleep, his breathing a soft, even rhythm in the darkness, the silence of the house would press in on me. It was so loud and absolute, it was like a physical scream. It was the sound of a life that had been cut in half. To keep from drowning in it, to keep from going mad, I took every extra shift I could get at the university library. The scent of old paper and binding glue became a strange sort of comfort. The quiet, respectful rustle of pages, a substitute for the conversations I no longer had. I graded student papers until my eyes burned and the words blurred together. I typed up long, dense manuscripts for professors on weekends until my fingers were numb and stiff, all fueled by cheap, bitter coffee from the staff room and a desperate, primal need to keep moving, to not let the grief swallow me whole. Every dollar I made, every last ounce of energy I had, I poured it into Marky's future. I was fiercely determined to give him more than I had, a life of stability and security. I didn't want the beautiful but brutal uncertainty of a musician's life for him, not the smoky dive bars and the hand-me-down shoes that were John's reality. I wanted central air conditioning and a steady paycheck for my boy. I wanted college degrees and a 401k. He used to sit at my desk while I typed late into the night, a little shadow at my side, scribbling his own fantastic stories about knights and dragons in wide-ruled notebooks. He'd look up at me with those big, serious eyes, so much like his father's, and say, "I'm going to be a writer like you, Mama." We'd listen to Patsy Cline and Johnny Cash on the old record player, their voices full of heartbreak and truth. And sometimes, when the album stopped spinning and the needle lifted with a soft click, we'd just sit together in the quiet and listen to the chirping of the crickets outside, a secret symphony just for us. Those were the nights that stitched us together, quiet, fragile moments woven from ink and music, and the shared breath of a mother and son holding on tight against the world. But things change. Lord, don't they always? There's one thing, though, that has stayed with me through it all. A leather-bound journal. Its dark brown cover is now soft and supple around the edges from 50 years of being held, its spine a roadmap of wrinkles and creases, barely holding on. I've written in it nearly every day since I was a teenager, a skinny girl with scraped knees and impossible dreams. Every stage of my life is held within those pages, from the nervous, thrilling excitement of a girlhood crush and the sacred, terrifying weight of wedding vows spoken in a small country church, to the gut-wrenching, hollow grief of loss and the quiet, sometimes reluctant acceptance of growing old. Every time I open it, the pages smell faintly of cedar and old ink, as if time itself has been folded and pressed into the paper. It's not just a diary. It's so much more than that. It's memory made physical. It's the only tangible proof I have that I was here, that I loved, that I mattered. I've documented birthdays and holidays, of course, but it's the little fleeting moments that I cherished recording the most. Marky's first loose tooth, which I carefully tucked into a tiny glassine envelope and taped to a page dated April 12, 1989. The smell of John's favorite chili recipe simmering on the stove on a cold winter's day, a recipe I wrote down with his loving instructions. The exact shade of the Colorado River the morning I stood on its banks and said a final silent goodbye to my mother. That journal lives inside a carved oak box John gave me on our 5th anniversary. He'd had it made by a local craftsman, an old man down in Gruing, who understood the weight and story of wood and memory. I keep it on the table next to my bed, locked with a small brass key, its interior lined with the faded red velvet. It is, in its own quiet way, the most sacred object I own. And now, now Marky's coming to visit this weekend. He said he'd be here Saturday afternoon. It's been over a year, 4 seasons come and gone, since the last time he set foot in this house. Ever since I heard his voice on the phone, brief, businesslike, but his voice nonetheless, I've been fluttering around the house like a young girl waiting for her first beau. Hope is a funny thing. It's so light it can feel like nothing at all, a feather on the wind, but it's so stubborn and persistent it can carry you through the darkest, loneliest days. I've been imagining the conversation, rehearsing little anecdotes in my head, praying this time will be different. The first thing I did, the very day he called, was plan dessert. Mark's favorite, pecan pie. Not the store-bought kind, heaven forbid, the real deal. A crust made from scratch with ice-cold butter and a prayer, flaky and tender. Pecans toasted just right in a cast-iron skillet until they released their nutty, earthy perfume. A generous dash of good Kentucky bourbon in the filling to give it a warm, sophisticated kick. When he was a boy, he used to sneak into the kitchen and scoop out little bites with his finger before it had even cooled, leaving a trail of telltale fingerprints in the gooey caramelized center. He'd always grin, his face sticky and triumphant, and say mine was better than any restaurant in the whole wide world. So yesterday, I went to the farmer's market at the crack of dawn, when the air was still cool and smelled of damp earth. I picked through the bins, looking for the best pecans, the ones that felt heavy and full of promise in my palm. My own hands aren't what they used to be. The arthritis in my knuckles makes the heavy wooden rolling pin feel heavier than it is, and my eyes sometimes blur when I try to read the faded, spidery ink of my old recipes. But I still remember this one by heart, every measurement a part of my soul. I move slower than I used to, measuring each step of the process like a sacred ceremony, butter chilled to perfection, dough folded with a gentle practiced touch. The oven preheated to just the right temperature. Soon, that smell, sweet, warm, and heavy with memory, filled the entire house, chasing away some of the loneliness that tends to settle in the corners like dust. I even set the dining table, something I haven't done in ages. Just 2 plates, the blue patterned china he liked when he was little, and a small glass vase with a few bright orange marigolds from the yard. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was enough to say, I'm glad you're here. You are loved. This is still your home. There's no telling how long he'll stay. An hour, 2, long enough for a polite cup of coffee before he looks at his watch. But maybe, just maybe, he'll stay for pie. Maybe we'll sit out under the big pecan tree in the backyard, like we used to when he was a boy, and he'd tell me about the dragons he was going to slay in imaginary lands. We could talk about books, or music, or nothing at all. Just be together. And maybe, when he walks into my room and sees that oak box sitting by my bed, he'll remember too. Because love, the kind that lasts, isn't always loud or demanding. It's in the quiet waiting, in the patient baking, in the pages of a life we don't show to just anyone until it's time. Last night, I pulled out the old record player, blew the dust off the plastic lid, and found that worn-down copy of Johnny Cash's At Folsom Prison. The vinyl crackled and popped when the needle dropped, the exact same sound it used to make when John played it on Saturday nights, back when Marky was still in his pajamas, his hair slicked down with water, dancing barefoot and wild across the living room floor. I let the album spin while the pie cooled on the windowsill, Johnny's deep, gravelly voice keeping the house from falling too quiet, from feeling too empty. Before bed, I sat on the edge of my mattress and opened the journal, just for a minute, not to write, but just to feel its familiar weight in my hands, to remember. A page fell open to a clumsy, crayon-scrawled note from Marky, from 2nd grade. He'd written, in big, earnest letters, to the best mama in the world, someday I'll write a book about you. I ran my fingers over the faded purple crayon, the texture still slightly waxy after all these years. It was still there. Maybe tomorrow he'll see it again. Maybe this time he'll remember who I've always been to him. It was the 2nd Saturday of August. The Austin heat was pressing hard against the windows, a physical presence, thick and heavy like wet wool. The air itself felt tired and breathless. I had changed the curtains that morning, swapping the heavy winter drapes for the light, airy linen ones, as if that could somehow lighten the mood of the house itself. I dusted the living room twice, and I made sure the old window air conditioner was humming steadily, a rattling but reliable old friend, doing its best to fight off the oppressive humidity. My hands were still a little sticky with flour from having touched up the pie crust when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway, a sound so rare it made my heart leap. I opened the front door, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, not from the heat, but from something softer, more fragile, and far more dangerous. Expectation, longing. He stepped out of a sleek black SUV, the kind that looks more like a spaceship than a car, its windows tinted so dark you couldn't see inside. He had on expensive sunglasses, and he was dressed in sharp pressed slacks and a polo shirt that probably cost more than my monthly pension check. But it wasn't the expensive clothes that made my breath catch in my throat. It was his face. It was a mask. Cold, closed off, a wall of weary impatience. He looked tired of me before he'd even said a single word. Beside him, clinging to his arm as if for support, was his wife. She wore designer heels that clacked too loudly, too sharply for my worn wooden porch, an aggressive, impatient sound. Her smile was tight and practiced, a brief, meaningless flash of white teeth that didn't reach her eyes. And something in those eyes, a flicker of cool, condescending assessment as she looked at my little house, at my faded dress, at me, told me this visit wasn't an act of kindness. It was an obligation, a chore to be checked off a list before they could get back to their real lives. "Marky," I called out, my voice too loud in the heavy air, too bright, too cheerful in a desperate, foolish attempt to bridge the yawning silence that already stretched between us. "Come on in, sweetie. I made pecan pie, your favorite." He didn't smile. He didn't even look at me. He just brushed past me through the doorway, the smell of expensive, sterile cologne momentarily replacing the warm, welcoming scent of pie and furniture polish that filled my home. I reached out instinctively, my hand still dusted with the ghost of flour and sugar, a mother's ancient impulse to touch, to connect, but he shoved it aside with a quick, dismissive flick of his wrist, as if swatting away an insect. "God, Mom," he muttered, his voice low and irritated, meant only for me to hear. "Why is it always like this? You know we're not staying long. Don't start with the whole pie and memories routine." I stood frozen at the threshold, my hand still hovering in the air where he had been. The screen door sighed shut behind me, its spring groaning in protest. His wife let out a little tinkling giggle and whispered something in his ear that made him smirk. They sat down without invitation, tossing their expensive things, a leather briefcase, a designer purse that cost more than my sofa, onto my hand-stitched quilted couch like it was a bench in a motel lobby. I tried to gather myself, to smooth over the raw, stinging hurt that was spreading through my chest. I offered lemonade, gesturing to the pitcher on the coffee table, beads of condensation running down its sides. I suggested we sit outside under the shade of the big pecan tree where it was cooler, but he just waved me off, his eyes already scanning the room like a critic reviewing a failed, dusty museum exhibit. His gaze lingered on the faint water stain on the ceiling from last year's storm, the frayed edge of the braided rug, the stack of old National Geographic magazines by my chair. It was a look of pure disdain, and then he saw it. In the dim light of my bedroom, visible from the living room, was the oak box on my bedside table, the one John gave me all those decades ago, hand-carved and lined with velvet. The one that held my journal, 50 years of my writing, my thoughts, my poems, my letters, my prayers, my soul, pressed between pages. He stood up and walked toward it. My voice came out thin and shaking, a pale, reedy version of itself. Mark, honey, no, please don't touch that. He ignored me. He opened the box. He pulled the journal out. It sagged in his large, manicured hand, the old leather creaking at the spine as his lip curled in contempt. This? He scoffed, holding it up as if it were a piece of roadkill. This is what you're always babbling about? This dusty old crap? I pleaded with him, my voice barely a whisper now, all the air stolen from my lungs. Please, Marky, that's private. It's mine. It's all I have left of your father, of us, please. But he was already flipping through it, the fragile, age-thinned pages cracking under his rough, careless handling. I could hear them protesting, tearing slightly at the seams. His wife leaned over his shoulder, pointing and laughing at something she saw. A photograph, maybe. A pressed flower from my wedding bouquet. Jesus, this is pathetic, he said, his voice laced with a cold, cruel contempt that I had never heard from him before, not even in his worst teenage years. You really think anyone cares about this? About your sad little scribbles? I stepped forward, my hands outstretched, a beggar in my own home. Please stop, give it back to me. He turned on me then, his face a mask of cold, terrifying fury. You don't get it, do you? You live in this dump, clinging to junk like it means something. You're a burden, Mom. You've always been a burden. It's time someone cleaned this place out. And then he tore a page. The sound was not a clean rip, but a ragged, fibrous tearing, like the sound of something living being pulled apart. A raw, guttural scream ripped from my throat. It was a sound I didn't recognize as my own, an animal sound of pure agony. Stop! Please, stop! That's 50 years, Marky. It's your father's handwriting in there, your baby drawings. It's everything. But he didn't stop. He ripped another page, and then another, long, angry tears that sounded like skin breaking, like a life being unmade right in front of my eyes. I could see my own handwriting, snippets of my soul fluttering to the floor. I saw a corner of a photo of John. I saw a line from a poem. I ran to him, my only thought to save what was left, grabbing at his arm, but he shoved me hard. I stumbled back, my feet tangling in the old rug. My body hit the unforgiving wooden arm of the old sofa before landing in a heap on the floor. A sharp, searing electric pain shot through my left hip. My breath caught in my throat, a choked, painful gasp. And then he slapped me, just once, an open palm across my left cheek. I heard the sharp, wet crack of it before I even felt it. The sting came a moment later, hot and shameful, spreading across my face like fire. A ringing started in my ear, and then the silence. A terrible ringing silence where the world seemed to stop. I looked up from the floor and saw his face. There was no regret, no shock at what he'd done, just pure, unadulterated disgust, as if I had forced him into this ugliness, as if my pain was an inconvenience to him. You're done, old lady, he said, his voice flat and dead, devoid of all emotion. Stop calling, stop writing. I'm not your little boy anymore. Then he walked to the kitchen and dumped the armful of torn, violated pages into the trash can, right on top of some greasy takeout wrappers from the night before. His girlfriend was already by the door, her purse clutched in her hand, an impatient look on her face. She smiled at me, a cruel, triumphant little smile, as if it were a show well executed. Mark turned back one last time, his face a cold, hard mask. Seriously, Mom, get help or get a maid. And they left. Just like that. The black SUV crunched over the gravel, its engine a low growl, and then it was gone. I don't remember how long I sat there on the floor. The world had gone fuzzy and distant. The pie had cooled on the counter, its sweet promise now a mockery. The ice in the tall glasses of lemonade melted into pale sweet water. The house was too quiet. The silence a roaring in my ears that drowned out the hum of the air conditioner and the distant music from the honky-tonk. I finally, painfully, crawled to the trash can, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely grip the lid. I tried to salvage something, anything, but the ink had already bled from the moisture of the discarded food. The pages were crumpled, soiled, and torn beyond any hope of repair. A piece of a poem I'd written about John floated on top of a half-eaten container of noodles. Just one line was still legible. To love and be left, and love anyway. I held that small, stained scrap of paper to my chest and let it cut, let it scar, because that's all that was left of me. Later that night, when the house was wrapped in deep shadows and even the cicadas outside had gone quiet, I forced myself to stand, using a chair to pull myself up. My face still ached with a dull, throbbing pain. My body was a map of bruises and stiff, protesting joints. The pain in my hip was a sharp, constant reminder, but the worst pain wasn't in my bones. It was in the silence where a voice used to call me Mom. I limped toward the trash bin again, my heart pounding like it was trying to run away from my own chest. I opened the lid, and the smell of garbage and ruined memories hit me. There it was. Everything I had written, everything I had lived, everything I had saved, stained with grease, soggy in places. Some pages clung together as if they were still trying to hold on to each other in their final moments. I knelt on the cold kitchen tile, my knees cracking in protest, and began the heartbreaking, sacred task of pulling out what I could. Bits of ink blurred by soda, a grocery list from 1982, a quick, loving sketch John had made of the river on a napkin, Mark's proud note from second grade, Mama is magic. Half a sentence here, a fragment of a memory there. I laid them all out on the kitchen table, trying to piece them back together like a shattered mirror. But you can't reassemble time once it's been shredded. You can't untear a life. I sat there until the first pale light of dawn crept through the window, painting the kitchen in shades of gray. Not crying, just breathing, hollow, as if something vital and irreplaceable had been surgically removed from me while I was still awake. And in that cold, gray light, I realized he didn't just tear my journal, he tore me. I sat there until dawn, not crying, just breathing, feeling hollowed out. It was a loneliness so profound, it felt like a physical place, a room without doors or windows where the air was too thin to breathe. Have you ever had a moment so shattering it left you breathless, wondering how you'd ever piece yourself back together? I'd be grateful to hear about it in the comments below, just to know I'm not the only one who has felt that way. November in Austin had a chill that crept into your bones, but the cold I felt wasn't from the weather. It came from inside, deep, hollow, and paralyzing. My little wood frame house, once so full of warm light and the smell of cornbread baking, felt like a forgotten mausoleum. Not even the familiar click and hum of the old heater could thaw the silence that had settled inside me like a shroud. I hadn't eaten properly in days. Food tasted like ash in my mouth. I couldn't sleep. I would just sit in John's old armchair, the floral pattern worn smooth by time, and stare at the empty trash bin, the place where the shredded remains of my life used to be. Mark's cruel words still echoed in the quiet rooms, clear as day, slicing through every waking moment and haunting the little sleep I could manage. Crazy old hag. No one gives a damn about your scribbles. Get out of my face. Burden. I had loved that boy with every fiber of my being. I had sacrificed so much. My journals, those pages had held 50 years of motherhood, of being John's wife, of growing from a girl into a woman through loss and love and quiet joy, now reduced to garbage. My body was still sore from his shove, the deep bruise blooming slow and dark across my hip like a cruel, unwanted reminder of his visit. Every time I moved, a sharp pain reminded me. But the worst part, by far, wasn't the physical pain. It was the silence on the other end of the phone, the silence where my son used to be. For days, all I could do was pray. But they weren't the kind of prayers that bring comfort or peace. No, these were raw, desperate cries, filled with doubt and tinged with an anger that was even directed toward the Almighty. I was angry at the very words I used to cherish. My Bible sat on the nightstand, unopened, its gilded pages collecting a fine layer of dust. My favorite fountain pen lay untouched in its drawer. I didn't know what was more broken, my body, my spirit, or my faith. But somewhere in the depths of that despair, one face kept coming to mind. Eleanor Vance, my old friend. We'd met at the Austin Writers Circle right after I retired. Eleanor, a woman with a voice like Varsovati's and a spine of steel, had taught English at the university for 40 years. She had published books of poetry, raised hell when it was needed, and loved fiercely. I remembered something she told me once, after I'd shared a particularly personal piece from my journal. She had put her hand on my arm, her touch firm and reassuring, and said, "Dottie Mae, the pen is how we defy being erased." Maybe she would understand. Maybe someone still could. So one Wednesday, the physical effort feeling monumental, I pulled on my oldest, softest cardigan, the color of faded cornflowers, and walked slowly and uncertainly the 4 blocks to the branch library. Every step sent a jolt of pain through my hip, but I kept going. It was the night of their monthly meeting. I had no manuscript to share, no new drafts, not even a quote I found inspiring. All I had was my grief, bundled up inside me like a lead weight. When I entered that familiar, comforting community room with its smell of books and brewed coffee, heads turned. My friends, these fellow storytellers, looked stunned. I must have seemed ghost-like, my eyes swollen, my face hollow, my hands trembling like old birch leaves in a cold wind. Eleanor rushed to my side, her face a mask of concern, and wrapped her strong arms tight around my frail frame. She whispered, "Baby, what on earth happened?" I sat down in my usual chair, and for the first time since that terrible Saturday, I told them everything. I wept as I spoke, my voice cracking and sticking in my throat like a rusty hinge. Mark, my boy, he destroyed it. My journal, 50 years, my John, our story, it's all gone. He said it was trash. He hit me. He said I was nothing, a waste of space. I clutched my soaked handkerchief like it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. I wasn't speaking to make a scene. I was bleeding truth, letting it spill over every page that no longer existed. A heavy, sacred silence filled the room. Then it broke, not with polite whispers of sympathy, but with a wave of collective fury. God help us, someone muttered from the back. That's just evil, another woman said, her voice shaking with rage. He's a monster. Fists clenched on the table. A few of the women sobbed quietly into their hands, not out of pity for me, but out of a shared, righteous anger. These weren't just fellow writers. In that moment, they became my witnesses. And witnesses have a sacred duty to carry the truth. Then Eleanor stood. Her voice was no longer velvet. It thundered. That boy is not just guilty of hurting his mother, he has desecrated history. Our stories matter. Dorothy Mae's words mattered. That diary was holy ground. We cannot let this pass. This is our fight now. Every single one of us. She looked directly at me, her eyes filled with defiant tears. I know a young journalist, a good man named Marcus Jones, at the Austin American-Statesman. He's sharp as a tack and compassionate. He believes in the power of words, in justice. Dorothy Mae, would you be willing to tell your story again for the city, for the state, for the nation? I hesitated for a moment. A lifetime of ingrained habit telling me to keep family business private, to not make a fuss. Then I felt it. Something inside me. Something that had been coiled tight with fear and shame for weeks began to uncoil. No, Mark didn't get to silence me. Not now, not ever. I will, I said, my voice louder and stronger than I intended. I'll tell every word. I'll hold up every torn scrap. I'll speak for every mother who's been thrown aside, for every elder who has been called useless. I'll speak for John, for my pen, for every storyteller whose voice someone tried to erase. That support, that fire in my friend's eyes, it was like a match in the dark. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Have you ever found strength you didn't know you had, simply because someone else truly saw you and believed in you? I would be so honored to read your story. That night, for the first time in weeks, I sat by my small kitchen table with a fresh, clean notebook Eleanor had given me, and I pressed the pen down. I wrote, December 12th, 2023. My name is Dorothy Mae, and I remember everything. The ink flowed. The memories poured out, messy, raw, and imperfect. But they were mine. They were mine again. The next day, Marcus met me at a little diner downtown. He brought his notepad, a warm, genuine smile, and a kind of deep, respectful reverence in the way he listened. There was no rush, no judgment, just space for the truth to finally be heard. When I handed him a scan of the few last surviving pages, he looked at me, his eyes full of a sorrow that felt like my own, and he said, "This deserves to be heard," loudly. The article ran 2 weeks later on the front page, with a headline I will never forget, "Mother's Legacy Torn Apart, but Her Words Endure." The response was staggering. Letters came pouring in from women all across Texas. At our next Writers' Circle meeting, there were new faces, young and old, holding notebooks and journals and even napkins with scribbled poems. And when it was my turn to read, I stood tall. "My name is Dottie Mae," I said, "and I have something to say." They listened, and I kept going, because silence was never meant for women like us. I didn't expect the phone to ring that next Monday, or the knock on the porch rail that followed. It was Marcus Jones. He looked no older than my Mark had in his college days, only Marcus had kind eyes and a warmth that reached past the screen door. For 3 hours, he sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had tried to piece my shredded life back together. He sat with just a pen and paper and the kind of deep, respectful silence that invites truth to come out of hiding. He read the scraps I had salvaged from the trash, handling them with the care of an archaeologist examining sacred artifacts. When I rolled up my sleeve and showed him the dark, fading bruises on my arm, he didn't flinch or look away. His pen paused. A long, slow breath left him. "That's enough," he whispered, and there was a world of anger and sadness in those 2 words. 2 mornings later, my name was on the front page of the Austin American-Statesman. The headline was bold, impossible to ignore. "A mother's memories torn and trashed, Austin elder abused, her 50-year journal destroyed by own son." They used a photo Marcus took when I wasn't looking. Me sitting at my table, holding those torn pages, my chin lifted, my eyes looking out the window as if in prayer. The story took on a life of its own. It exploded. By noon, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Local news stations, national radio shows. A bookstore in San Antonio mailed me a new leather-bound journal, its pages thick and creamy, embossed with my name in gold foil. It came with a note written in beautiful calligraphy: "Your story matters. Please keep writing." I wasn't forgotten. I wasn't a burden. I had become the flame around which others gathered for warmth. And Mark? He disappeared into a cloud of public shame. Rumor had it he'd taken a forced indefinite leave from his high-paying job. One of his old poker buddies, a man I vaguely remembered from years ago, emailed me anonymously. The subject line just said, "For Dottie Mae." The email read, "He's not eating, not sleeping. Nobody talks to him at the gym anymore. His wife stopped showing up at church." Eleanor called it consequences. I called it justice dressed in quiet. Then came the circle. My writers' group stood taller than ever. They weren't just friends anymore. They were my line of defense, my town criers, my army of storytellers. "We're not letting this pass into silence," Eleanor said at our next meeting, her voice like steel. "We're holding a public reading, a protest of erasure, a celebration of memory." They named it the Community Reading for the Stolen Voice of Dorothy Mae Washington, and scheduled it for a Saturday at the Austin Community Arts Center. They printed flyers with my face on them and created a website that crashed from too much traffic. Meanwhile, letters arrived at my little bungalow, real ones, with stamps and trembling, elegant cursive from women in retirement homes, from sons who apologized on behalf of sons like mine. One envelope carried a faded photograph of a woman I'd never met, standing in front of the charred remains of a burned journal, with a short, heartbreaking note: "Mine is gone too, but you gave it a voice." And then came the lawyers. Texas, Rio Grande Legal Aid, the Elders Defense Council, even a private firm out of Dallas that offered to work pro bono. They sat with me at the same kitchen table Marcus once had and explained things like civil litigation and restitution for emotional distress. I didn't understand every legal term, but I understood their intent to make sure Mark couldn't rewrite what he had done, couldn't dismiss it as a simple family squabble. I don't want his money, I said plainly, my voice clear and steady. I want his silence, recorded. I want what he did to be a permanent record, a fact that can never be denied or forgotten. I wasn't out for vengeance. I was out for permanence. The week of the event, Eleanor and I sat on my porch and selected entries from my journals, those few that had survived and those I had painstakingly retyped from memory. Simple things, mostly. A description of the first time John held my hand at the county fair, a poem about a thunderstorm, the grocery list from the week Marky was born, with diapers circled 3 times. They weren't grand or dramatic, but they had roots, and roots don't burn easily. The night before the event, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. It was a voicemail from Mark. His voice was thick, choked. "Mama, I saw the paper. I saw the comments online. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I was stressed. Please, call this off. Tell them we're okay. Tell them to stop." There was no apology for the bruises, for the torn pages, for the disrespect that had cut me to the bone. Just fear. Fear for his reputation, and shame for being caught. I listened to it once, then a second time, and then I pressed delete. I opened the new leather journal and wrote, "There is a difference between regret and repentance. One wants relief, the other demands change." The morning of the reading arrived. I wore a blue dress, John's favorite color, and I clutched the scraps of my past with both hands. The community center was full to bursting. Rows upon rows of strangers, women with gray curls like mine, college students with laptops, veterans in uniform. Some held small candles, unlit. Some wore pins that read, "Let her speak." When I stepped onto that stage, the crowd fell into a hushed, expectant silence. I looked out at them, not just as listeners, but as witnesses. And I said, my voice soft but steady, I was told I was too old to remember, that what I wrote didn't matter, that I was in the way. But stories, they don't die just because someone wants them to. We pass them on, and they grow stronger. In that silence, something passed through the air like the wind in tall grass. They stood up, one by one, then in a great, silent, powerful wave. And I stood taller than I had in years. January 2024, the morning light filtered through the tall glass windows of the Austin Community Arts Center. That place, so deeply rooted in the soul of our city, had never felt more sacred. The auditorium was packed, with people standing in the aisles and spilling out into the hallway. Writers, poets, librarians, students, neighbors, strangers. They had all come for the promise of truth. I sat in the front row between Eleanor and the mayor, my hands trembling slightly in my lap. On my knees was a stack of printed pages, reconstructed fragments of my journal, my life. I glanced toward the back corner of the auditorium. They had said Mark might come, and there, near the red glow of the emergency exit sign, a man sat with his head down, his shoulders hunched so far forward he looked like he was trying to fold into himself. I didn't need to see his face. A mother knows her child's shadow. The event opened with soft country music, songs John used to hum while he washed the dishes. That alone was enough to make me cry from remembrance. Then Eleanor rose, her voice the calm but ringing with the conviction that reached every corner of the room. "Friends," she said, "we gather today not just to celebrate writing, but to resurrect a voice that was almost erased. Today is not just a reading, it is a reckoning." Then she turned to me, her eyes full of a fierce, protective love, and said simply, "Dottie Mae Washington." The room fell into a reverent hush. I stood, my spine straight, and walked to the podium with the bundle of pages clutched to my chest. The spotlight was warm on my face. I looked out at the sea of people, all these strangers who had become my kin, and I began. "My name is Dottie Mae Washington. These pages I hold, they are what's left of 50 years of love, labor, and loss. They are my truth. I started from the beginning. I read about falling in love with John under a starry Texas sky, about the overwhelming, terrifying joy when Marky was born, his tiny hand wrapped so tightly around my finger. I read about the good years, the simple years of picnics by the river and bedtime stories under a patchwork quilt. Then my voice grew softer as I read about the slow, painful unraveling after John died, how writing in my journal every night was the one thing that helped me stay whole. I read about how Marky grew distant, then cold, then cruel. I read the words I had written the night he had called me dead weight. My voice cracked on those words, but it didn't break. And then I read the line that made everyone in the room hold their breath. "I gave birth to a boy who thought he could erase me." When I finished, the room was filled with a stunned, collective sorrow. It was a silence so profound you could feel it. I heard someone whisper, "Lord have mercy." Eleanor returned to the stage and wrapped her arms around me before turning to the crowd. "What kind of son?" she said slowly, her voice clear and cutting. "Destroys the memory of his mother in order to rewrite her into a servant? What kind of man does that?" She didn't name him, she didn't have to. Every eye in that auditorium turned toward that shadowy corner by the exit. I didn't turn. They told me later that Mark's shoulders shook as he sobbed quietly and violently into his hands, but no one moved to offer him comfort. That kind of silence is louder than any speech. Then, a woman from the Austin Public Library stepped forward, holding a rich brown leather-bound journal and a silver fountain pen. "Mrs. Washington," she said into the microphone, her voice thick with emotion, "we would be honored if you would write again. This time not in secret, not in fear, but in history. Your story deserves to be bound, preserved, and taught." I took the journal and the pen, whispering, "Thank you." The applause was thunderous, the kind that feels like it could lift the roof off, the kind that lifts something sacred into the air. And that was the moment I knew they couldn't kill my story. Mark tried to rip my words from the world, but tonight my voice had taken root, not in ink alone, but in hearts, in witnesses, in truth. I walked back to my seat, the new journal pressed to my chest like a shield, and I looked straight ahead. Let him sit there, swallowed in his shame. I had no more words for him, but I had pages, empty, waiting, sacred, and Lord, I would fill them. It was a golden September afternoon in Austin, the kind of day that makes you believe in second chances. I sat on the old porch chair John had built all those years ago, a worn paperback in my lap. Around me, the happy, busy hum of life from my writer's circle filled the air as we prepped for that Saturday's Dottie Mae Story Corner. I felt it then, the deep, settled calm of a soul reclaimed, a voice returned. After that community reading, I wasn't the same. In March of 2024, I picked up that beautiful silver fountain pen and I began to rewrite everything. I wrote John's laugh, the sound of Marky's tiny footsteps on the hardwood floors, and I wrote about the pain, too. I wrote about the slap, the torn pages, the coldness in my son's eyes. But I wrote it not with anger, but with the clear-eyed understanding of a survivor. Writing wasn't about revenge anymore. It was resurrection. Each word brought me closer to peace. By April, I had a full manuscript, a memoir. I called it Resurrected Memories, a mother's journey through betrayal and back to herself. Eleanor, my fierce, wonderful friend, helped me submit it to a local publisher in town, and by June, it was a real book with my name printed clear as day on the cover, Dorothy Mae Washington, author. The launch party was held at my favorite little indie bookstore in the city. My people came, the writers, the librarians, the neighbors, the strangers who had become friends. When I held that book, fresh off the press, smelling of ink and possibility, I felt like I was holding my life in both hands, and this time, no one could take it from me. A few weeks later, I received a letter with a Houston postmark. It was Mark's handwriting, but it was shaky, almost unrecognizable. The ink was smudged in places, as if he'd cried while writing it. He said he'd read the book, and that he finally saw what he had done. He said he was ashamed, broken. He didn't expect anything, not forgiveness, not a phone call, just a chance someday to try to call me mom again and mean it. I read the letter 3 times, then I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer with the old photographs. I didn't answer it, not because I hadn't forgiven him. I think in some quiet, complicated way I had, but because forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or returning to the way things were. Some journeys you have to walk apart. That same week, I started Dorothy Mae Story Corner at the local library. Every Saturday morning, I sat in a circle with women like me, silver-haired, soulful, and full of stories they'd never been asked to tell. We shared, we cried, we laughed, and we healed. It became a lighthouse, a place where no one had to prove they mattered. They just did. Through it all, I found I didn't miss the struggle to be seen by my son. I was already seen, clearly, deeply, by people who chose to understand. Mark never wrote again after that one letter, and I never pressed him to. The door wasn't locked, but I wasn't waiting in the hallway for him anymore. I had stories to tend to, a life I had rebuilt with my own trembling, loving A's. Now, as I look across my porch to the garden where the tomatoes are finally ripening on the vine, I feel whole. Not because the past didn't hurt, but because I finally told the truth about it. Loudly, clearly, without shame. They tried to shred my memories, to reduce me to a muttering old woman in a dusty house. They failed, miserably, because I am Dorothy Mae Washington, a writer, a storyteller, a mother, a woman who refused to be erased. My story? I wrote it myself, in ink that won't fade. And long after I'm gone, that story will remain, folded in pages, spoken aloud on quiet Saturday afternoons, carried in hearts that know what it means to survive. And now, as the sun dips lower behind the sycamore trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I find myself no longer speaking just to the past. I'm speaking to you, to every woman who's ever been silenced or simply overlooked. You know, Sometimes when we sit together like this, the stories just start pouring out like a stream. Today, I wanted to open my heart a little, and I hope you'll feel like doing the same. Sisters, mothers, grandmothers. You see, sometimes just a single tap on a screen, a like, a subscribe, a share might feel small. But for voices like mine, for women who have been told to be quiet for too long, that little click shines like a soft light in the dark. It quietly says, I see you, I hear you, your story matters. It reminds me we're not invisible. Your click, your presence, your voice. It's a powerful gesture of support. And after sharing mine today, something has shifted inside me. For weeks after that day, all I truly longed for was someone to simply listen. But now I realize what I want most is to hear you. Down there in the comments, if you're willing, it would mean the world to me if you'd share a piece of your story. Tell me about a moment you felt unheard. Tell me about a dream that others called silly. Or tell me about a time you discovered your strength, even if it came quietly in the smallest way. I'll read your words. I'll carry them with me. Because your story, dear sister, matters. Here on Sapphire Revenge, we're building a circle, a space where we women can share the hidden corners of our lives with honesty, without judgment. And I know some stories are hard to share with family or even with friends. That's why I'm here, to listen, to walk beside you, because we all deserve to be seen. We all deserve to be heard. And if your story isn't a sad one, if today brought you a little joy, share that too. Tell me something that made you smile this morning. You never know. Your joy might be the light someone else needs today. If you're watching this on your TV, don't hesitate. Pick up your phone and find the Sapphire Revenge channel. I'd love to keep walking with you, story by story. Let's make this a place where women are truly heard, where no woman ever has to feel that her life, her battles, or her victories were invisible. Thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for sitting with me today. That means everything. So tell me, would you like to share the first piece of your story with me right now?